Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about the Oregon Trail. If you watched this week's episode of Who Do You Think You Are, you may have noticed that Kelsey Grammer discovered that some of his ancestors came west on the Oregon Trail. And one of the things that I have learned in doing my own family history is that sometimes, in order to understand the lives of our ancestors and the choices that they made, we need to understand a little bit more about the historical events surrounding their lives. And the history of the Oregon Trail is more than just a line on a map and more than just a video game that I grew up with. So I'm going to start by just giving you some dates and some reference information around the Oregon Trail. We'll look at a map, and then I'll share with you some of my favorite resources for learning more about those of your ancestors who may have been part of the Westward expansion. So let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk first just about some dates to kind of get your head wrapped around what we're talking about. In the early 1800s, the western border of the United States was the Mississippi River. Then there was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, doubled the country in size, pushed the nation's boundaries past the Rocky Mountains. Okay, but all of the Oregon part of the Oregon country, which is Oregon and Washington and Idaho at the time, was actually still owned by the British. And so in 1803, you may be familiar with Lewis and Clark and their expedition where they went west looking for ways for westward expansion, for settlement in the western territories. So that was kind of the trail, like Lewis and Clark kind of blazed the trail, but the trail that they blazed was pretty treacherous, and so there needed to be some better ways to do that. And so then in 1810, there was a group of people at Fort Astoria, which is on the western end of the Columbia River on the Pacific Ocean, who went the other direction. So they went from Fort Astoria to St. Louis, Missouri. And let's just look at a map here so that you get kind of a feel for what we're looking at, okay? The Columbia River comes out into the Pacific Ocean just right up here at the top of Oregon, and Fort Astoria is there. So Robert Stewart actually went from Fort Astoria backwards or eastward to St. Louis. Took him about 10 months to do that, skipped past my map there. But the path that he took was a little easier than the path that Lewis and Clark had taken 7 years earlier. So that was in 1810. The first wagons did not head west, though, until 1836. So that's going to be a big key date for you, 1836. If you have white family members being born in Oregon Territory prior to 1836, you've probably got some misinformation in your records, okay? So just keep that date in mind, 1836. In 1836, the first wagons went from Missouri to Oregon. They didn't make it all the way, okay, but they proved that it was doable to do by wagon, to take that train by wagon, that trail. Then in 1843 was when the big party was organized. It was more than 1,000 people organized at Independence, Missouri. They called it the Great Migration, and this wagon train of people made it across the trail successfully. And so then, very quickly, additional parties were put together. For some people, this was actually a money-making venture, and so you see people putting together wagon parties and taking them out west, guiding them out west. But we end up, within just 3 years, By 1846, thousands and thousands of people have gone west for cheap land because of that was a big reason, cheap land. Okay, another big reason was the concept of manifest destiny, or the fact that America or the United States would spread from ocean to ocean, and so it was a sense of patriotism to fulfill that manifest destiny. And some of them just wanted a better life. Some of them just wanted, a new place to start over or to settle with their families and to give their families something more. And so we end up with thousands of people there. And because so many Americans, thousands of them, were settling in this place, the British actually ceded Oregon to the United States in 1846. And so that kind of established the Oregon Trail. Those were the establishing events of that westward expansion. And then from 1846 through 1860, until the railroad was completed, we have thousands more, tens of thousands more people using the Oregon Trail from Missouri through Wyoming, through Nebraska and Wyoming and Idaho and into Oregon to settle those western states. Now, there was a cutoff trail that was created that went down to California into the Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area. That was used by a lot of people. There was also a cutoff trail down into Utah for the Mormon pioneers used. And so we end up with lots of different groups of people, not just headed to Oregon, but headed to some of these other western states using that trail. Now, let's talk about where you can learn more about some of the circumstances there. If you go to Ancestry.com, we actually have a database called Early Oregonians Index, okay? And if you scroll down here to the database description, which I hope you always do, whenever you find a database that you're interested in, scroll down past the search box and read that database description so you understand a little bit more about this. In this case, this index was created by the Oregon State Archives, and they're looking specifically at people who lived in the Oregon Territory between 1800 and 1860. Now, they started this index with the 1850 and 1860 censuses. So that's where some of the information, or the heart of this information, comes from. But they also then used probate records and vital records and other records to both enhance the information already in the database and to add or make sure nobody was missed in this database. So it's pretty good. You're going to find things like names, aliases, birth dates and places, death dates and places, and burial locations. And remember, Oregon Territory was more than just Oregon. It encompassed parts of Idaho and Washington as well. And so you'll see some of the people from those territories included in this particular database. Now, it is just an index, so you're going to see some pretty basic information in here. But again, it's just the information that the archive was able to collect and include. So if we come here to an entry, you can kind of get a feel for what it looks like. In this case, this woman, Mary Caroline Tidwell, was also known as Polly Wilson, and she was born the 9th of December, either 1840 or 1842 in Illinois. She died the 17th of January, 1916 in Washington County, Oregon. Okay, so it just gives, again, basic information about some of these people. It is just an index, but it's a good clue to finding those family members of yours who may have gone west, and when they may have arrived there. If you look for others of her family, you might start to see some patterns there. Always look for families, not just individuals, because you're going to have a more complete picture that way. Okay, another couple of resources on Ancestry.com that I want to point out for learning more about the Oregon Trail. I actually just did a little exercise and was surprised by the results, but I think it's kind of cool. Sometimes we get so stuck in name searches that I think we forget we can do other kinds of searches on Ancestry.com. So I just went to search, and let me just show you the search that I did here. If I scroll down, the only thing I searched for was the keywords Oregon Trail in quotation marks That makes sure that the phrase is shows up, not just the individual words. And I marked that exact, and I did a search. And specifically, I did that search in the stories, memories, and histories category on Ancestry.com. And so what I have here then is a list of 2 books that include information about the Oregon Trail. Some of them are specific family histories. Let me make this just a smidge bigger so you can see what I'm looking at here. Some of them are histories specific to families, right? So you end up with the Long and Dube families of North Carolina, and their Midwestern descendants. And so presumably they had family who went further west. The Felton family, the Nye family. But you also end up with place histories. And place histories, in my opinion, are one of the most underutilized resources available on Ancestry.com. Even if your ancestor is not specifically mentioned, sometimes their community is, or the church they attended, or their neighbor, or their son-in-law, or whatever. And because it's not the specific person we're looking for, we skip right over that. But sometimes there are clues in there that not only help fill in the blanks of the who, what, where, when of our family history, but they also help kind of round out the story or help us understand them better. And so place histories, we have, a brief history here of Baker City, Kansas City, Missouri, a history of Missouri, a history of Montana, a history of the German Congregational Churches in the U.S., a history of the Puget Sound. All of these then, presumably, Northern California, Iowa, and then here's this short history of Oregon, including early discoveries, the Lewis and Clark exploration settlement, which then is a big section in that book in that book on the Oregon Trail. And so reading some of these books, and you can do that just like you would a book. You can click on any one of these and click through, and you'll see it takes you to a page in the book. And this particular book here is 346 pages. I could just click here and jump back to page 1 and just read my way through it just like I would a book. These histories sometimes provide us with the context we need and the historical information we need to know where the records exist, if they do exist, what kinds of records we should be looking for or using, and again, some of the motivations behind why our ancestors did some of the things that they did. So again, all I did was, in search, I put in the words Oregon Trail in the keyword field, put them in quotation marks, and then marked that exact, and that gives me a list of the titles or the books on Ancestry.com that have Oregon Trail somewhere mentioned in the book. Now, I did the same exact thing in a newspaper search, and I thought this was really interesting. It hadn't occurred to me to do it before I was preparing this presentation, and since I figured out that I could do that, now I've done it for all sorts of things, and I found some really cool stuff that I might share with you in a later presentation. But I went ahead and, again, in the keyword field, just put Oregon Trail in quotation marks, marked it exact, and did a search in all newspapers on Ancestry.com. And then depending on where I was interested in this case, I pulled up the Big Piney Examiner from Wyoming. You can quickly see some hit highlights here where they found Oregon Trail mentioned. And some of these are from way past the Oregon Trail dates, right? But some of them I've read through several of these articles, they're histories, they're reminiscence of some of the things that happened on the Oregon Trail. So they're, 100 years later, you've got a newspaper reporter who is writing about the history of the Oregon Trail. And there's some really great information in here. And sometimes you even end up with specific individuals mentioned. As a matter of fact, one of these articles back up here, if I just scroll back up here, is about a specific, he's called an Oregon Trailblazer, which I believe is the name of the basketball team in Oregon, the Trailblazers. And so that's probably where that comes from. There's an article about this particular individual who came across on the Oregon Trail. And so you can read about individuals, you can read about the specific events, and there's some really great, again, contextual information, even if your particular ancestor is not mentioned. Now, the last resource that I want to share with you is actually a site that's been put up in conjunction with the National Park Service and the Oregon Trail Association. The website is paper-trail.org. paper-trail.org. And what this organization is doing, it's the Oregon California Trails Association, and again, I think it's in conjunction with the National Park Service. They have digitized documents that they have collected pertaining to the Oregon Trail. So we're talking about diaries of pioneers who came across, any kind of documentation that they can find. And anytime anyone is mentioned in those documents, they've created this names index, or this pioneer names index. So you can actually search their database and see if your particular pioneer is mentioned. Now, the search is actually free. So you can, to search is free, but if you want to view the documents themselves, the diary or the journal or the reminiscence or the newspaper article or whatever it is that they've discovered about this particular person, the autobiography, they've used guidebooks, letters, they do require, it is a pay site, so you do have to subscribe and pay for that. But sometimes it's useful just to even see the search results, to see who it is, what year it was that they came across on the Oregon Trail, and then what type of an immigrant they were, what type of information is included about them. And so there's little icons that give you information, make that bigger for you, little icons that give you information about that, where they're from. In this case, this guy, Captain Wilkinson, came across in 1850. He was the captain of the party. You have information like that just kind of is basic information for free. And then if you want to view one of these documents, it is a subscription site. So just a couple of resources that are available for you to learn more on Ancestry.com as well as elsewhere about the Oregon Trail specifically and those who came across. If you have family that's living east of the Mississippi prior to 1830 or 1840 and then all of a sudden they disappear, try looking west. A lot of people headed west in the 1840s and 1850s, and not all of them stayed there. Some of them went west to try to claim their fortune, and then some returned back to their place of origin. And so you may see them drop off. You can't find them in an 1850 or an 1860 census, and then all of a sudden they show back up in 1870. Try looking in some of those western states. You might be surprised at what you find. And if you do find them there, then learn a little bit more about the history to give you some context and some understanding, again, of why these people made some of the choices that they made. A lot of attractive propositions out west in the early days. Well, that is all I have prepared for you today. I think every once in a while a little history lesson is a good thing. It's certainly good for me to dig in and prepare these presentations for you. I always learn a lot. I am putting together the September events calendar, so if you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to see addressed in the month of September, please send me an email at ask@ancestry.com. We'll look over those and we'll get that schedule posted very soon. I'm also going on a speaking tour here this next couple of weeks, and so if you check the Ancestry.com Facebook page, check out our events, you'll see my hiatus dates are listed there, so there won't be any shows for a couple of weeks, and then we'll return the first full week of September, maybe the second full week of September. I probably should have looked at that ahead of time. But check the events page on Facebook for the specific details about when our next show will be. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.